It's the pressure. Come on. Zoom,
It is a pressure cooker out there, man.
zoom, zoom, zoom.
Now everybody went away. Oh my God.
It's the pressure. Come on. Nope, there's the oil
Duh.
field.
Do you want to do this story?
Sure, that's my backyard.
Right.
Thank you. I'd like to call to order the Lacey Planning Commission meeting, August 15th. I'm looking for a motion for approval of the agenda and consent agenda items.
So moved.
Second.
So just give us 1 second. Moved by Gail and second by Mark. Got it. So we're still,
We're
Sorry.
gonna still say our names.
yeah, we're
We
still
have to say our names.
working on our new system, which is going great. So thank you for that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. We're looking for public comments. I see there's probably a few people out of the public out there.
Yeah, so we do at least have, we don't have anybody here at City Hall, but we do have members of the audience on Zoom. So if anybody would like to address the Planning Commission, this is your opportunity to do that. You can do that by using the raise hand function. And we'll go ahead and bring you into the webinar. So if you wanted to address the Planning Commission, you can do it, but using that raise hand function, we'll go ahead and bring you in. Going once, going twice. I don't see anybody here that is ready to address the Planning Commission at this point.
We'll move on to commission members' reports.
I have nothing.
No
report.
Nothing from me.
Nothing.
Anything from you, Karen?
I attended the neighborhood commercial open house, which was really informative in getting to hear from the public concerns about traffic and safety and different issues about the growth in those areas. And I also thought it was really interesting. I was reading an article recently about rent control and what they're doing in New York City of all places, but they were saying to ensure that people are able to live in the housing and afford and keep stable housing, that they have that 40 times rent rule, which I thought was really interesting. And so it got me a little bit curious about Googling rents in Lacey, and a couple different sites. It went from like $1,717 a month up to about $2,398 a month, which would mean that renters here, in order to have that stable and housing without worry about bills and that, would have to have anywhere between $68,000 to $95,000 of income to be able to comfortably afford rentals in our city. And I just thought that was a really interesting figure going forward, but it's really interesting to just see what that comfort zone is to ensure people are able to maintain housing comfortably. And I also noticed before I went into surgery, I saw that some of the camps along the area by the on Sleater Kinney, they've been putting boulders and creating that and cleaning up that area, so you could really see the difference about how many people are going into housing, and so that's a really positive to see that there aren't as many people that are unhoused and having to deal with this type of heat, especially this time of year. So I just thought that was really interesting. And I was also actually curious, I know that we don't have rent control, we don't do anything like that, but is there anything similar to that 40 times rent rule here in Lacey or in the area to ensure affordability or of housing?
We don't have rent control, and there are some state laws that address when and if you can do rent control, and so we don't have anything in Lacey. What we've done is we've kind of examined the issue through our affordable housing strategy. And so one of the things, it's been a little bit since we've maybe reviewed the affordable housing strategy, but if you remember, I think we completed that in about 2019. It looked at essentially kind of like what wages were in our community, from everything from basically minimum wage to, you know, the kind of the upper end of the market, if you will, and what they could afford along the way. And, you know, what we found, this is probably even changed since we've done that, as housing's gotten more expensive, is that, you know, people living on minimum wage have, you know, very few opportunities in our community to be able to afford much of anything unless they are essentially sharing bedrooms with, you know, with others. So, you know, it's, and, you know, what we looked at there was, in order, the definition of affordable was that you are spending not more than 30% of your income on housing and housing related, you know, things like utilities and stuff like that, housing related amenities. So that's kind of the generally assumed definition of affordable, is if you're not spending more than 30%. And so, you know, keep that in mind too, is that, you know, when we think about wages and affordability, the other guide is 30% of your wage. Above that is not considered affordable.
Is that
And-
a calculation of net or gross?
I believe it's gross. Yeah, yep, before taxes.
The other thing that ties in with that is recent legislation updating the Growth Management Act to require cities and counties planning under the act to actually plan for the different strata of affordable housing. So we've got TRPC under contract right now to update our housing action plan inventory data to find out what we have at each affordability level. And that goes up to moderate as well, which is 115% of the median area income. So I think I did that calculation the other day. I think that's like $94,000 or maybe just over $100,000. So we'll get good data and we'll know what our needs are. And that'll be a huge topic as we move through the comp plan update. So.
Okay. Anything else? Karen, anything else?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay, and Kathy didn't join us, did she? She was never there.
It doesn't look like it. No.
Alrighty. Okay,
I
we'll,
just have a question, you know, she talked about affordable housing and moving out of the Slater-Kinney freeway on-ramp there. I did notice the other day that there appeared to be more campers along the freeway between Marvin Road and Slater-Kinney, immediately adjacent to the freeway, than there were prior to cleaning out that area. I just wonder if we're shifting people from one happy freeway location to another.
I don't,
You want me to speak to that?
yeah, go ahead, Grant.
So if they're on the right, they won't be there after the camp is closed. And the State Patrol will be trespassing people from now on. So other right-of-way camps don't approach. The whole concept of the legislature giving us all this money was to get the infrastructure in place to move people out of the right-of-ways and not let new people in. So what you're seeing is probably a little bit of a shifting as they finish up with Slater-Kinney. And as they're going through on the Hobby Lobby side now, they're the boulders that were mentioned, they're cleaning up, they move people into Maple Court in sections. They come in, clean it up, place the boulders, do maintenance, and post no trespassing signs. So anybody reoccupying those areas would get a 72-hour trespass notice. And that'll be enforced by the State Patrol.
Yeah, and so so maybe we can move on to department report, because this is what we're gonna talk about in the department report, is some of our some updates on Maple Court and talking about the right of way issues. So as of this morning, there are 29 people left at the Hobby Lobby encampment. 24 of them are on essentially a list to get housing. So there will be 5 that don't have the opportunity to get housing. If they're there after the camp is closed, then they will be trespassed. And that's what Grant was talking about there. Maple Court currently has 93 residents in a total of 81 rooms. There are 39 open rooms available right now in Maple Court. So yeah, and as you've seen, and I think over the last, especially the last 2 days, they've been taking a travel lane out of I-5 and actually putting, taking those boulders and putting them up on the hill. So it's really kind of condensed that Hobby Lobby encampment so that it's relatively contained. It's relatively small compared to what it was. And so there's been a lot of changes that there. It sounds like maybe some people have moved to other spots, which will be interesting to track. But the idea is that, like Grant said, that they will eventually be removed from those locations. So the one thing I did want to mention associated with our expectation is that the rest of that Slater and Kinney Hobby Lobby encampment will be housed, and then that would be closed. The only thing I'll say is that could change a little bit because there are some needs of some of the individuals there that they need ADA accessible rooms, and there aren't enough ADA accessible rooms in Maple Court. And so there may need to be some accommodations made there for some of the people to have some accessibility issues. Anything else, Grant, that you want to add to that?
Just that the team, the state team that's doing the site tagging and moving people, helping people move, is now pretty much starting to plan and tag at Wheeler. So that'll be the next encampment to be cleared and people offered housing. The probability is that most of those folks will go into the Franz Anderson Tiny Shelter Village when it opens.
And my understanding is that's the end of this month when that tiny shelter village will be open. That's 50 additional shelter units there.
Yep, correct. And then Ryan, maybe update on the permanent supported housing in France.
Sure. So there's a second portion of the Franz Anderson property that's dedicated towards permanent supportive housing, I believe about 100 units. And so that's long-term, kind of like I'll say apartment style living that is being done by the city of Olympia. It's a regional initiative in that we've all put in essentially our pots of money. The city of Lacey is putting in $3 million of our 2023 budget money in that. Other jurisdictions would be Tumwater and Thurston County, who are putting in their ARPA dollars associated with that. That they did a selection for the developer of that, which will be led by the Low Income Housing Institute. The same folks that are doing Maple Court will be leading that. And so we're moving forward towards signature of an interlocal agreement between all of the parties to kind of establish how all the funding works and gets transferred to the city of Olympia and how they manage the project going forward. So we'll be moving that forward to the council most likely in September for approval of the interlocal agreement to get going on that. And then that'll help spur eventual construction. It'll take some time. That'll probably be, I don't know, at least a year and a half probably from being able to open its doors. But the idea is, and the way that the interlocal agreement is being written is that people coming out of both Maple Court and the tiny shelter village, that will be the place that they would go next. So instead of being, right now, these are essentially kind of shelters in that sense. There's not the permanent supportive housing aspect in our community right now. And so that this would be a primary place that people coming out of the shelters would be able to land and get the kind of the permanent supportive housing that they would need.
I have a question. So I don't mean to be not sympathetic or empathetic, but how would ADA or accommodation housing, it's certainly got to be more or better or closer to meeting their needs in a hotel than it would be you know, on a right away off the side of the interstate. So is it because now we're laying in some regulations or laws that we need to make sure we're compliant with that? Because I would think it would still be a step up for them and something that they would want. Even if maybe the counters aren't the right height or the toilet's not the right height or something like that.
That's right. You start accommodating housing people and then, you know, you have to, you know, start dealing with things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. You know, that doesn't apply necessarily when they're in a tent on the side of the freeway.
Okay.
You know, things like, you mentioned counter heights, but things like, you know, toilets and grab
Accessible
bars. Accessible bathrooms is a large part of that. The lip on a shower to be able to get in and out, those kinds of things. Or, you know, can they step into a bathtub versus needing a roll-in shower? So all those things start to kind of pop up when you know, get into a, you know, congregate care type facility like this that you don't necessarily have when somebody, because they were not living legally on the side, you know, in the right of ways. So they're, now that we're accommodating them and they have, you know, this type of housing, then that's when the accommodations have to start coming into play.
So that could become prohibitive cost-wise, but that's probably, is that a national effort or a state effort to maybe have accommodations, so to speak, within the ADA guidelines that you wouldn't necessarily need to be held to those same standards? Is that something that's way beyond city, probably,
Yeah, the
maybe
American.
even beyond state? It's going to be national, correct?
Correct. Yeah, Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law that came in the 60s or later than that. I can't remember
60s
exactly.
or 70s.
Yeah, exactly when those regulations came into play, but they are a national standard. And then, you know, what it does is it sets forth through the implementation of our building codes and our development codes, the implementation of that. So all of our codes are, you know, designed to meet the requirements of that act. So, you know, you'd have to go back to change things nationally and then have that implemented locally through our own building codes. So it would be quite a effort to modify those.
Yeah, and you wouldn't, well, maybe you wouldn't need it with building codes if you're creating some space versus just.
So Ed, let me clarify a little bit. The hotel right now does meet ADA. They've got the appropriate number of units for that use. But the Department of Commerce is actually realizing region-wide there's a lack of accessible units in the shelters. So they're asking Lehigh to potentially add more accessible units to accommodate the regional need. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
More reports?
That's it for the department report.
Okay, we do not have a public hearing this evening. So we'll move on to new business. Neighborhood commercial open house debrief by Hans.
Hey everyone. So yeah, we last week finished up with the in-person, I should say, component of our next open house related to neighborhood commercial districts. We were enough to have some planning commission members there. So thank you for those that are here tonight that were also able to attend that. Your presence was greatly appreciated. I think in total we had around 10 to 12 community members that participate this time around. So a little bit smaller, a lot smaller, I should say, than the first in-person meeting. But then similar to that last time around, we opened it up to the community in more of a online open house capacity and saw actually our participation numbers jump pretty drastically. And then we ran it last time for about 3 months, actually. This time we're following a similar path and going to be, we've already sent it out through a lot of different communication channels, but going to be offering everything that we presented last Wednesday also online in an online capacity. Maybe not quite as long as last time around, but in a similar format. So the community is familiar with that. I will bring up, see if I can do this really quick. Our city website. You all can see that?
Yep.
Wonderful. So yeah, this is our city website. Everybody should be relatively familiar with that. My little window is right in the way, so I'm going to move that out of the way. But our neighborhood commercial districts do have a project-specific website or webpage, I should say, within our city website. And that's something that can be found either by searching, or I believe it still actually lives down here as well. So by accessing that site, you actually get all of the content that we went through on Wednesday, but also everything up to this point that we've found, researched, all the feedback that we've heard, all of our summary reports, all of our findings. That all lives here. So at any given time, anyone from the community who's interested in learning about where we're at in this project, the findings to this point, can visit this page and get all that content. So it's always live and always available. So it doesn't require in-person attendance at any meetings. But right now, when you navigate to the neighborhood commercial districts page, the first thing that you see is our online open house. And right here is actually the beginning of the posters that we went through on Wednesday night. And you can actually scroll through those and see the different posters that are there. I think that there's a little bit of a lag because I'm trying to stream and do videos all at the same time here. But that content is all there. It's also something that is downloadable, so you can view it down here. And I'm actually going to jump over, and then really quickly, our feedback form is right here. So as folks are working through these slides, there's a way to actually provide feedback back to our project team. So that's all that kind of landing page there. And then back up at the top, there's the process. So how we're working through this process, previous events and findings, project materials, and next steps. But yeah, I'm going to jump over to some of our slides that we talked about. The first few slides within the open house were kind of the usual suspects. So introducing neighborhood commercial districts to the community again. Where are they? Kind of what's their general intent? That kind of material and information that we presented at the beginning of the first one as well. But moving into kind of more of the new content that we had, new findings for this presentation. One of the folders that we create or posters that we created discussed 15-minute walking areas. So we actually mapped a 15-minute walking radius around each one of these neighborhood commercial districts and actually saw how far you could get from each one of those locations. And we did this for two different reasons. One was one of the significant intents of these districts is that they are highly walkable and provide a walkable commercial option within neighborhood communities. So we wanted to look at how effective we actually were at accomplishing that intent. And then the other thing that we wanted to look at is these zones are designed to fill some of the service area gaps of our more traditional, larger, typically commercial zones closer to the center of the city. So these really work to kind of fill those gaps farther out on the periphery that you can see here. There's an example here, and then farther down here, you can just see that again. So that's what this poster is all about. And then we also presented one of the findings out of the 2021 Buildable Lands Report. This was actually a great report for many reasons, but it also looked specifically at neighborhood commercial style development and its potential over the next 20 years. So it actually did a lot of the legwork as far as how many households does it need in order to support neighborhood style commercial development. And one of the findings out of that report is that each household can support approximately, and given this is a range, about 15 square feet of a walkable commercial retail space. And that's important because we have different zones that are spread across the community, and some of those have a range of different housing densities surrounding them, and some of which do meet that threshold, and some are actually still short of that. But we also looked at kind of an example of what a 15,000 square foot retail space looks like, as well as a 30,000 square foot retail space, and kind of some of the differences of the types of uses that might do well in each one of those zones. But yeah, it is important to note that this is only a household. We're only really looking at households in this sense, but there are a range of other metrics that feed into kind of decision making of why a business is going to site somewhere. So you have to take this information with a little bit of a grain of salt, but it's still very informative in that sense. And then taking that one household per 15 square feet of commercial retail space, we actually mapped that out across each one of our districts and projected that based on the 2020 census on outward to our next planning horizon, which is right around that 2040 timeline, and look at each of our districts to see how many of them had capacity to support different ranges of neighborhood commercial development over time. And what we found is that while some of them may not actually have the capacity to support 15,000 square feet of neighborhood commercial space today, looking forward, they all have meet at least that threshold or greater by 2035 or 2040. So that's what this graphic is all about. And then we also looked at different example districts based on our initial survey. So one of the questions that we asked within our initial survey was, are there other communities or other districts out there that you would like to see our neighborhood commercial districts modeled after? And we asked that question because it's sometimes a lot easier to identify other locations that you're a fan of instead of being able to identify specific design elements or features that you would like to see kind of on a more individual or granular level. So we actually received over 150 different example locations within that survey that folks were a fan of for one reason or another. A lot of them had different descriptions as to why they selected those or identifies those locations. But looking at all of those locations, we whittled that down to a list of around 20 of them. And then from there, we looked at things like their actual zoning designation. So some of these districts actually weren't designated neighborhood commercial districts, which is not actually that surprising, but they still had a lot of the same characteristics that folks were looking for. So we looked at zoning, we looked at the number of households within a half-mile radius of these locations. We looked at income, population, daytime population, so how many people come into the area, so as far as people that live there and stay there versus also those that come into the area to work, so at the businesses that are located within that zone, and then also retail spending to really kind of just get a little bit broader of a cross-section of criteria from each one of these zones that we could actually compare to our own districts to find out how cleanly they actually match. So when we're looking at these districts, we can find out if it's really a realistic comparison or if it's something like downtown Portland, which has a lot of great features, but what works there may not be a great example for our neighboring commercial districts. So that's what this graphic is all about. It is pretty tiny, I imagine, for you guys, but it is all out there and available. So I encourage you to look through it. And then we went, took that larger list and broke it down into the top 7 districts based on that criteria and the most popular destinations identified within our previous survey. And then we looked at things like district intent statements, permitted uses, design criteria, and access and accessibility, and looked for common themes and threads throughout each one of those elements of these districts. Within the intent statements, walkability, access, compact design, and really fitting within the surrounding neighborhood were all common themes that we saw throughout. Also things like mixed use and creativity or adaptability. And that one was phrased a little bit differently a couple different times depending on what district you were in. But those were also common themes that we saw that showed up within these intent statements within these different districts. And then looking at design elements, permitted and conditional uses. Interestingly enough, the majority of these districts that were identified actually permitted gas stations, which was a really high or a hot topic and a really big motivator within this discussion that we see consistently show up. So of these districts, DuPont, Point Ruston, Briggs, Wildwood, and Fairhaven actually all accept gas stations either outright as a conditional use or as an accessory use to some other use, like a grocery store or something like that as an example. Only University Places, Bridgeport, and the Proctor District in Tacoma were the only 2 that either didn't allow it or actually went so far as to list it as a prohibited use. So that's some of the elements that we saw in there. And then moving into housing, which was another hot topic that we wanted to explore a little bit further based on the initial feedback that we've heard so far. We wanted to find out what types of housing was allowed in each one of these districts, and was it allowed on the ground floor? Those are kind of the 2 big questions that we're asking as part of this. So running through DuPont or Ross Plaza, which is kind of that downtown district there. They allow all housing types, all the way from single family all the way up to multifamily, and they do allow them on all floors within that zone. Bridgeport within University Place, they restrict it to multifamily and live work style housing development, and all of that is above ground floor within University Place. Point Ruston doesn't allow single family, but all other housing types of use are allowed on all floors. And then the Proctor district over here on the end, that one is all housing is allowed and on all floors. So there's no restrictions there. Dropping down into the bottom three, the Briggs area, it's again, all housing is allowed on all floors. And then moving into Wildwood, and then Fairhaven itself, all housing is available or is permitted in each one of those locations. But they do have some specific location and design requirements that do limit where and when that housing can exist, depending on what type of housing it is, whether it's multifamily or single family or apartment style or anything in between. So those are the common themes that we saw in there. Other elements that we saw a lot of within this discussion, there's a lot of mixed use discussion, kind of live work style housing. Those are also kind of represented within this as far as types of housing that are a little bit more unique and location specific and detailed. And then the other thing that we looked at within each one of these as far as design elements is access and public spaces. So we wanted to know kind of at the human scale when people are out and about, what are some of the kind of experiential, more human elements that are consistent that folks are attracted to and appreciate within these locations. And we saw within these locations that there are things like curb bump outs, on-street angled parking, pavement treatments. That's things like brick or other kind of pavement texturing to make it not feel just like a basic road. Planter strips and planter boxes, street trees, defined spaces. Again, kind of really kind of making it smaller, so it's more of that human scale versus kind of large vehicle oriented. And then things like signs and awnings, making them again kind of targeted at people walking by instead of people driving by. So little things like that that really all kind of contribute to make more of a space feel like a space, if you will. But yeah, that was pretty much everything that we covered as part of the open house. All of that again is available online. And then we did conclude the open house with a timeline, so where we're at, where we're going. So right now we're in the summer 2023 zone right here. So that's drafting code updates and community review. So while this forum is running, we're going to be starting to actually look at our code and actually rewriting it and doing draft revisions based on the feedback that we've heard, based on those example districts, and based on additional feedback as it comes in moving forward. So yeah, that's today kind of where we're at. And then those draft code changes are going to be presented to you guys. They're going to be shared again on the website. They're going to be shared with the community. They're going to be pretty broadly distributed and broadcasted just to make sure that as many eyes get on it as possible. And then from there, we'll revise those based on your feedback, based on community feedback, and then it'll actually move into the fall where we're going to be looking at incorporating these updates, taking it to city council, and potentially some implementation changes. So yeah, that's neighborhood commercial districts where we're at, how the open house went. I don't know, we had a few of the planning commission members there. I don't know if you want to speak to your experiences as far as how the open house itself was.
I can comment. I thought it was incredibly well received that you gave the presentation. I saw people really engaging in the style. And I think that's a point of differentiation from at the Salish Middle School. I thought that was a really great approach. And of course you had more, as you mentioned, a lot more comments about Meridian Market gas station issue and people still trying to find ways, asking is there some way for the city to stop that? And a lot of conversation about there's, the appearance of no progress versus what's online available, for the community to see their submissions. So those were the two themes that stuck out to me. If you don't mind, I do have a question that I meant to
Sure.
ask at night. Why is it a point of distinction or source of debate whether residential is permitted on the first floor or not on the first floor?
Yeah, so currently within our neighborhood commercial districts, residential uses are not allowed on the ground floor. So they're only allowed above ground floor, so above some kind of commercial use. So that's how it's currently written. As part of the feedback that we've received both from the community and as part of the business outreach that we've conducted, and some of the feedback that we've heard from some of the property owners that own these neighborhood commercial districts, that was an element that we wanted to explore further. Really just, I don't know if I have a graphic that I can quickly show of this, but within the feedback that we received, that was something that really received a lot of mixed feedback and mixed kind of sentiments about how and when residential usage should be incorporated within these zones. So that was part of it. And then also looking at the buildable lands report, looking at the amount of homes that's needed to really actually support these neighborhood commercial districts within a given location, and really kind of looking at that 20-year planning horizon, making sure that not only are they set up from a code perspective, but they're also set up from a kind of business viability and success perspective. So we want to make sure that not only are the right types of commercial uses going in, but also that they have the critical mass to support them as businesses so that they can thrive in those locations. So that's kind of why we're looking at housing. It's a multi-part answer, I guess, but yeah.
Somewhat logical. I just can't imagine if it's a pedestrian walkway with lots of people, I just wouldn't want my living room windows, my bedroom windows, my kitchen windows looking out at eye level
Yeah.
with a lot of people walking.
Yeah, I noticed it was
It's
called
different
out.
if it's a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Because it's less walking, but if you're gonna have.
But it was specifically called out in the survey, which sounds like they're really wanting to collect data on that. But in the differentiation between the sample neighborhoods that people have called out, that's something you described, whether they allow it on the first floor or not. It's just, it's a funny feature that,
So an example,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, an example of one that that kind of a code that we used to have that no longer applies, and so they changed the project to accommodate it was 6th Avenue, right down here, across from the library, 6th Avenue. When that code was originally written for the Woodland District, did not allow ground floor residential. It was only commercial, and we had a hard time with, number one, getting projects because there aren't a lot of mixed use developers. There's a lot of kind of like multifamily developers, there's a lot of commercial developers, but that kind of splits the middle, that there's not a really defined market, at least not yet in our community. And so what we did was we analyzed it and said, okay, what if we looked at taking away that requirement? We did a community forum, and we had the council take a look at it. They removed that requirement, and as soon as we did, the project, I think it's called 6 Wood Flats now, next to the David's Bistro. Those spaces that were originally reserved for retail, they immediately filled up with residential. And what that did was it created went from a vacant storefront and to really nice little patio spots for people to have ground floor units there. And so it really almost created a more vibrant situation versus having, these vacant storefronts and now, planter boxes and people, sitting out front of their units. And so I think it may not be for everybody, but I think, it is an opportunity for people to have those kinds of spaces that may want to live in a more urban lifestyle. And so those opportunities are, oftentimes people maybe aren't the first priority for somebody, but.
The other thing is the live workspace,
Right.
If you've got a small, well, if you look at 2040, how much more IT connection is there gonna be? People aren't gonna leave their home. So if you had a store in the front or a workspace in the front and a house in the back, or a living space in the back, you're not on the street, but you're you're at your business and you can communicate around the world at any time, which I think is coming, you know, if it's not already here, and maybe making that at least available is a good sort of future planning move.
And I
Might
think
not be for you, might not be for me, but you know.
one thing that I think will probably most likely be a recommendation coming out of this will be, right now there's that, it basically is a requirement that all mixed use be vertical. And I think one thing we're
Yeah.
looking at is making it more all encompassing, where maybe mixed use could be horizontal instead of just vertical. So, you know, instead of saying, well, if you want residential, it has to be above retail. Well, if you want residential, maybe it could be next to the retail, but on the same site. And then it, you know, it creates a synergistic relationship almost between the residential that's there and the commercial. You have a, you know, captive audience of people that will want to, you know, be a patron of whatever's next to them. It, like Hans mentioned, will also help with the viability of these places by having high density residential right in those same, you know, in the same proximity. So I think there's a lot of advantage to having residential, you know, in neighborhood commercial areas. I think it's just, we need to kind of, you know, think a little differently about how we go about doing that in the future.
Yeah, like next to could work.
Right.
I just had like a comment and a question. First off, I know this was born of like the gas station issue, but I love that this feels like planning to me. This really feels like we're being very, very intentional about seeking feedback. How do we want these to look? And we don't have people coming in wanting these spaces, but it feels like we're really doing all the right things that a city should do. And so it feels really good. It feels, I know it was born of a situation that was not positively received, but I think we're making lemonade out of it in a really, really positive way. So good work, Hans. I like that. It really feels planning to me, and that feels really good. Though my question is, I continue to drive around Lacey and there's so much extra commercial space.
Yeah.
What do we think is maybe, and I know we can't predict the economy, but this is probably, you know, maybe lucky for somebody to want one of these once we get this all done, but it could be 3 to 4 years in the making before these spaces are filled, or longer, correct? Depending on the economy.
And, you know, Hans had that slide that showed the viability of some of those spots. It may not even be in the next 2 to 3 years. It may be longer than that. But really what it says is these spaces are still really important, right? So, and we're talking about the day-to-day needs, okay, well, I don't need to, especially in Northeast Lacey, I don't need to go to the other side of the freeway to, you know, to grab something, or, you know, get my hair cut, or, you know, have a daycare, or, you know, those kinds of things. So it still provides a valuable resource to our community. They may not pencil out in the near term, but long term, you know, I think that what that slide showed was there's a long-term viability that's there, that these things are important and they need to be preserved and not rezoned for other uses.
And especially in places like Fairhaven, and they really become hubs of cultural and social activity. They're worthwhile.
Yeah, to just kind of echo what Ryan was saying, this is kind of a difficult conversation to have because we are in the long range planning game. And when folks are looking at a lot today, it's a very different conversation than what we're trying to do as far as looking at that 20-year planning horizon and knowing that need that's maybe not as strong today, but it's definitely going to be there and it's definitely going to grow moving forward. So we have to make those decisions now to preserve those spaces for that type of use. Otherwise, they are going to get developed in different ways that really kind of tie our ability to be able to actually provide those or meet those needs in the future. So it is that kind of really that long-term look that we're trying to take with these lots. So sometimes that is frustrating. We definitely hear that from the community and sometimes the developers that, you know, they want to go ahead and do something else there and have their, you know, private lot to do with what they will, but it is part of the process that we need to be cognizant of. So I think that's pretty much all I have. I did have one other thought. When we were talking about the residential on the ground floor, some of the districts that we're looking at did take a little bit of a different approach where depending on the location within that district, there are some allowances for ground floor residential, but maybe not on the primary corners or kind of the high visibility zones, things like that, but maybe more drawn back from those kind of primary intersections or activity hubs, still on the ground floor, but just a little bit more recessed. and kind of transitioning towards that commercial use, more of that lateral mixed use approach. And in doing that, it sometimes also helps create more of a transition between those residential uses that are directly next door. So there's, what we're finding is a lot of different ways to come at this. And our goal is really to kind of pick the best approaches that really make sense for us and our community in these districts. So still more to come.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, we will move on to the preparation for the joint plan meeting with Thurston County.
Thank you, Hans.
Yep.
Yeah,
You're
thank
back-
you.
Presentation.
You're back up again.
Yeah, thank you. I'll throw on my other hat here
Yeah.
and we'll just keep going.
Thanks,
Uh,
Hans. Again.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen again. This time should look a little different. So this is actually part of the slide deck that we're planning on going through on Wednesday, the 23rd. So next week, Wednesday. So it's fast approaching. So you guys will get a little bit of a sneak peek today, but you still have to act surprised next week when you see it again. So the component that I'm presenting on is really threefold. One is the engagement that we've done leading up to this joint plan. Two is just the planning elements that you see within the plan. So the traditional requirements that are really dictated by the Growth Management Act and are really mirror what you see in our comprehensive plan as well. So a lot of these are going to look really familiar. And then the bulk of what we're going to focus on is really what's changing or new or going to be different as part of this joint plan. And I imagine that's sort of the majority of our discussions next week are going to revolve around. But I did want to start really quickly with the outreach and engagement that we've done as part of this joint plan. I'm actually going to back up 2 slides to really kind of lay the groundwork. And I'm sorry, I'm probably killing you with text here, so this is very small. But really what it is that this joint plan is based on a collection of 22 other planning documents and project documents that have tackled different subjects. Neighborhood commercial development is a great example of that. We will have findings that come out of neighborhood commercial districts that really inform that component of our community and really that subject as a whole. And so the joint plan really borrows from other plans that do that really zero in on a subject and get the details and incorporate that into the joint plan as a whole. The advantage there is that without doing a lot of that legwork, you already have that strong community element. You already have a lot of perspectives that were provided through sometimes those other projects that really kind of create that bedrock of information that you can kind of build from. So that's taken place actually since starting back in 2016, really when we did our Envision Lacey outreach, and have carried that forward. Every time we do outreach within Lacey, it's not restricted to Lacey residents. We really kind of take a broader stroke and look at feedback from Lacey community as a whole. So that's folks that live in Lacey, folks that live in the urban growth area, folks that live and or work in one of those 2 locations, folks that really just come into our community for other reasons as well. So we really do take that broad approach when we're collecting feedback and really try to get that holistic perspective. And the joint plan is really rooted in that. So that's what this slide is all about. This one talks a little bit more about it. But as far as 2022, 2023 outreach that we've done so far, at the very beginning of this project, we launched again a project website or webpage, I'm sorry, that's specific to the joint plan update. It's going to again serve as our kind of information portal for everything that comes out of this. It's where things like our story map live. It's where our draft documents live. All of our findings live. We also created a story map, which is a much more user-friendly way to work through a document than reading a bunch of text. Planning isn't the most exciting topic for everybody, so the story map really serves as an alternative to really present a lot of that information in more of a graphical, approachable way that breaks it up into more bite-sized summary pieces that folks can consume. We've always also done a bunch of different social media outreach and kind of information campaigns. And then we've also attended a few events over the last month or two here, actually starting back in June with Juneteenth, also the July 3rd fireworks, and then the Thurston County Fair. We participated in each one of those events to really kind of go to where the community is, both City of Lacey, but then also Lacey urban growth area. So we tried to pick locations that really kind of brought a lot of folks in from all of those locations and really kind of had that broader community reach. And then spoke with folks at those events and really directed them kind of more of a information providing capacity towards the story map, encourage them to participate, provide comments, read about it, find out what updates are coming. So that's the outreach that we've done. And then I referenced this at the beginning, and I'm actually going to skip through this section pretty quick and go down to what's changing. But chapter elements, these are very similar to what we see in the comprehensive plan. So specifically for the City of Lacey, those same elements are included within the joint plan for our urban growth area. And they include things like urban design and land use, housing and affordability, our natural environment, parks, culture and recreation, economic development, public services, which includes things like emergency services, policing, fire, and then transportation, infrastructure, and utilities and capital facilities. So the next few slides, I am going to just breeze by those, but those are kind of the subjects that each one of those goes into a little bit more detail on. And I'm going to skip down to what's changing or what kind of bigger elements are there to look for within the comprehensive plan, or sorry, the joint plan. I might do that a couple times, so gotta keep me honest here. So yeah, on the what's changing front, there is a bit of just general upkeep. So this plan hasn't been updated since 2003, so it is very due. And honestly, the current plan, which is currently in effect today, really is not reflective of most of what's going on in the Lacey community at this point. It's really kind of restricting the potential in our urban growth area in a lot of different ways. So a big part of this update is aligning our current plan, so updating our current plan to really meet Thurston County and City of Lacey comprehensive plans. So our goals, our policies, our intent, our justification behind them, and then updating background information. So population projections, economic projections, other details like that change over time and need to be factored into our planning decisions. Land availability, so as things develop, our projections need to change, and then revised formatting and usability. So just a little bit of a fresher take on what that document looks like. Those are all general upkeep items, so things that typically change anytime we update a plan. But then there are some specific elements that we do want to spend a little bit more time with. The first one right out of the gate is the Martin Way corridor. This corridor actually runs through Lacey, through Thurston County, through the city of Olympia, and it really does have pretty broad reaching impacts on each one of those jurisdictions and communities. So there's a pretty robust Martin Way corridor study that's ongoing right now, but a big part of this is just adopting the findings, goals, and recommendations of that Martin Way corridor into this joint plan. So those goals are not only captured in that study, but also reflected within our joint plan with Thurston County on how to move forward within this corridor. Also looking at sewer requirements. So as I previously referenced, currently the joint plan was last adopted in 2003. So sewer requirements are pretty different today than they were back then. And one of the things that we've kind of known for a long time is that our urban growth area, and you can kind of see it on this map here, it's pretty small, but the orange and red areas are the highest contamination risk for groundwater and surface water based on existing septic systems. So we did want to really make sure that those relatively outdated septic and sewer requirements that are in our current plan are really updated to reflect the current goals, policies, and regulations within our comprehensive plan as we move forward, and our urban growth area is incorporated into the city, that those standards are already in place and consistent with our code. So it makes that more of a, both protects groundwater, but then also makes that a much more seamless transition over time. one of the findings out of this is that there's a recommendation for a strategic annexation plan that really does look at the cost to provide these city level services out to these farther periphery locations, specifically looking at septic conversions and ways to incentivize that both through funding mechanisms and zoning. So that's another element of this that we're going to be talking about. And then looking at agriculture protections, we do have 2 different agricultural zones within our urban growth area. In total, that amounts to around 219 acres. These zones really still are very pastoral in nature. They have a lot of kind of more open spaces and resource lands, lots higher vegetation densities, capacity to capture and infiltrate surface water. And really the reason that we're paying attention to these locations is that as our urban growth area transitions to, is incorporated into the city and transitions to more urban uses, we want to make sure that these locations are protected as long as they operate as these in these kind of agricultural capacities. But then if that use is ever to go away, that they are converted in a way that is not, so that density is maintained and ensured, and that these locations aren't kind of developed at a very almost rural small scale, if you will. So one of the discussions that we're going to be looking at is potentially placing these agricultural zones in what's called an urban holdings area, which really ensures that they're not developed until things like city services are available to serve them, to really kind of prevent that low density style development. And in doing so, the goal here is to take some of that pressure off of those existing agricultural uses so that they can keep operating in that capacity until such time that they're ready to transition. And then talking about urban holdings, or looking at McAllister geologically sensitive areas, and then Pleasant Glade. These are 2 locations that are pretty far out on the periphery of our urban growth area right now. And based on the information that we have today, it is exceedingly difficult to provide utilities services out to these locations. So we are exploring really kind of trying to figure out what that timeline really looks like. Land within our urban growth area should only really be in our urban growth area if we have the capacity to provide those services within our next general planning horizon to some degree. And then, so looking at these locations and trying to figure out if that's really a realistic expectation based on where they're located and based on the cost of providing those services, and finding out if in fact that doesn't make sense within the next planning horizon, if they should be redesignated as some form of an urban reserve where they're held in kind of a transition zone between county and urban growth area. And then as that demand and need and capacity increases, that they are then re-added to our urban growth area. And then incorporation of the 2018 Lacey and urban growth area pedestrian and bicycle plan. This is a pretty fantastic plan that was created in 2018. It has a lot of great goals, recommendations, and general kind of discussions on how to improve our community from a pedestrian and bicycle perspective. So it's just taking all of the findings from that report and really directly incorporating them into the joint plan. A great component of this report is that it did take that broader kind of community-wide view of our community and didn't look specifically at Lacey or specifically at the urban growth area. So it makes a whole lot of sense to really make sure that that gets captured and reflected within the joint plan. And then the last one, I'll hit on a couple elements here, but I might at some point kick it over to Ryan to take up the torch on this one. The addition of Greg Cuyo Park. Currently only about half of it is within the city boundaries. The other half is actually not even within our urban growth area, but outside within rural county. And that creates a lot of jurisdictional challenges as far as permitting, emergency response, and facility management. So looking at taking the remaining portions of the park that are currently city owned, but exist within the county and adding them to the urban growth area. So then we can take that next step of incorporating them within the city. Yeah, Ryan, do you have anything on that point?
Oh, great job. This map down here in the corner kind of shows the portions that are in the city. This darker green is it's currently in the city limits. Yep. And the northwestern portion, I guess, the property here, the kind of lighter olive color is that area that's proposed to be added to the urban growth area. So the process this is going through or has gone through is there's a requirement that it goes through a urban growth management subcommittee at Thurston Regional Planning Council. They have recommended approval of this, and then it then goes to the Board of County Commissioners. We've had some discussions with Thurston County staff on the way that this gets processed. And what we're doing is wrapping it into the joint plan so that it's clear that we've analyzed this and done this through the joint planning process. I don't think it's required to do it this way, but that's the choice that
Ryan, there's
we've
that
accepted.
one section there that is a lot of homeowners.
Yeah, so there's there's
Are they amenable?
we have not spoken to them. So there are 7 single-family residences there that are would be added to the urban growth area. There's 3 in this area here that are already half of their property is in the urban growth area. It's actually split. So this would just essentially clean that up. So there's only, in that area, there's 4 to the north and east of that would be affected. Because it would create essentially a donut hole there if they were not in the urban growth area. We haven't spoken to those property owners, but really, in a lot of sense, it doesn't really affect them because the utilities are so far away from there. So it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they'd be able to extend utilities and start developing at an urban level there because sewer is like 1.5 miles away. So it doesn't really grant them any additional development rights. They're all on individual wells and septics. And so, it would take probably, and that's part of actually that Pleasant Glade area that Hans was talking about, that we're actually looking at retracting some UGA because the utilities are so far away. So it doesn't actually grant them any additional development rights as a result. We'll reach out to them when the time's right, kind of inform them of what's going on. But my feeling is that
Change their life.
right. And the park surrounds them on all sides. So until the park develops, it's really not going to affect them one way or the other.
Is there any interest in purchasing those properties and incorporating them into the park or no?
I don't believe so. Not at this point. It's a large park. I think we have enough property that we could do with, a lot. Right now, we're just looking at doing just the initial phase of development, until we can, get more funds through, whatever means to be able to develop that more. At this point, I think we're looking at some minimal development here in this first phase just to get things going. But we have, it's the biggest municipal park in Thurston County. So at this point, we're not looking to expand it at all.
I think that's everything that I have. So if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to help answer them.
So that when you talk about Pleasant Glade, you're talking really about the distance for utilities to come in? Is that what it is?
That's
Yeah.
right. Both Pleasant Glade and McAllister geologic
Yeah.
sensitive area. So I'm gonna stop sharing your screen here, Hans.
Yep.
Yeah, so both of those have very limited utilities and the idea originally was and it was well thought out. It hasn't necessarily been implemented the way it was originally thought was both McAllister geologic sensitive areas and Pleasant Glade have some unique environmental characteristics. Pleasant Glade is more kind of like some of the headwaters of some creeks that go into Puget Sound. And so the idea is, well, let's bring it into the urban growth area so that we can sewer it, so that we can protect those water resources. And McAllister geologic sensitive area was done the same way, but to protect groundwater resources, because that's where a large amount of our region's groundwater comes from. So let's not, have this over proliferation of septic systems where we get our drinking water from. The problem has been with the execution is that we really, for sewer, we depend on development to extend sewer lines parcel by parcel by parcel. We do not do large capital projects we haven't until recently done big capital projects to install sewer systems in areas. And so that incremental approach has been very, very slow in bringing sewer to those areas. I'll say the exception to that has been, we have done some large capital projects, but really it's for failing systems. So things like, think about like Capital City Estates. That's one that we've done recently. There's another one, Tolmie Estates out in Northeast Lacey, that looks like we'll probably be doing a capital project there soon to address a failing septic system there. So those are the projects that we have done. We haven't extended sewer lines for the purpose of
Yeah.
development, not since probably the late 80s when we did LIDs out in Hawks Prairie.
Yeah.
That was probably the last time we've done those.
So at this joint planning meeting next week, our role is what?
Yeah, good question. And that's why we wanted to bring this to you.
Yeah.
Number one, it's going to be obviously a joint meeting with Thurston County. So, your
Thurston
role,
County Planning Commission?
correct.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, it'll be, I think they have I think it's a 9-member commission as well. So it'll be a large group of people, split into 2 meetings. Our feeling is the first meeting will mostly be presentation. A lot of kind of the same information will be shared. The second meeting, more kind of discussion. But our hope is, and staff will be there to help guide the discussions, but is to engage the Thurston County Planning Commission in some of these ideas and issues. So that's why we want to bring it to you tonight, because we kind of want to make sure that you are aware of some of the things that may be a little bit more crucial in terms of that discussion, so that things don't necessarily go, hopefully they don't go very sideways, that we're able to kind of keep the path moving forward, because we have a Thurston County Planning Commission that tends to really kind of think of things a little bit more in terms of, the greater county, especially thinking more about like, well, what happens in the rural county. They're dealing more with issues related to, mining, to agriculture, to those kinds of things. And they're not necessarily as keyed in on
Housing.
urban issues. And so that's where you guys can come in, is really say, hey, this is when it comes to affordable housing, or, septic to sewer conversions, or all those kind of important things that are part of our joint plan. Here, this is what we've been talking about. This is what we're seeing. And so that, if hopefully, it steers their planning commission in the right direction if things start to go a little sideways.
I just wanted to pop on and say that, well stated, Ryan. That's exactly right on spot.
But you guys will essentially be steering the direction of the meeting then, essentially.
Yeah, so there's exactly. It's going to be a staff-led, at least the first one, staff-led presentation, and then a discussion to follow. I would assume that discussion would get into the next meeting, and so this hasn't been done since 2002, maybe. So even before my time, believe it or not. So I'm not exactly sure, how this will go, but our goal is to move the joint plan forward in its current draft, and there's gonna be a draft available for review. And our intent is to make sure that, we are able to get
So
this
the
through.
current draft contains these items, is that
Correct,
correct?
yes.
So
Yes.
do you have a sense that there's a distant early warning that they're not in agreement with that? Or that-
There has been, yes, that's been our experience with, so we're basically the 4th city now to go through this process. Some of them have gone smoother than others. And so my understanding, the Tumwater plan went very smooth because Tumwater had done a lot of the pre-work like we have. The Olympia plan did not go as smooth. And my understanding is the reason is because there became discussions about how much agriculture should we have in the urban growth area, and those kinds of things, where those are not necessarily, a little bit counter to the Growth Management Act, right? Which the urban growth area should be urban. But they're thinking, we have a Thurston County Planning Commission that's focused on different topics, on different issues.
Well, they're under pressure about the agricultural part, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
They need to sign off on our plan.
They do not. So there will be essentially their sign off will be a joint recommendation. So they don't approve anything. It'll be a recommendation, much like you. It'll be a recommendation made to the Board of County Commissioners, who will officially endorse or sign off on the plan.
So we should be at a distinct advantage being the third city enforcing on this.
Yeah,
Fourth,
well,
how?
Yelm even beat us on this one.
Oh,
so-
Yelm, oh, Yelm too,
Yelm.
okay. Forgot about Yelm.
Yeah, so I think part of it too is that we've been probably the hardest because we have the biggest urban growth area. So we have, by size, we have the largest urban growth area. We also have probably the most out-of-date plan with the most out-of-date regulations that go along with them. And so this part will only get us through the plan update. The next step in after this is adopted will be for them to take, we're guiding them to basically repeal their current regulations and replace them with our current Lacey regulations, because we are so out of sync when it comes to the current regulations in our urban growth area. We've done so many updates in the last 20 years that just haven't been incorporated for one reason or the other. Yeah.
So it would not be appropriate to wear your gopher outfit to this meeting?
So
Will there be some kind of handout, or I can't be there because I'll be in California. Hopefully I'd be able to Zoom in, but I don't know where I'll be, so.
There's gonna definitely be a hybrid option, and we'll get you all the materials. My understanding is like within the next day or so, we'll probably get you all the materials.
Okay.
So you'll get this soon, and then there'll be a hybrid option for those that can't make it. Hopefully you're able to attend that way.
yeah, and a couple more things just on the event. So we have 2 Wednesday meetings scheduled a week apart. The first one really is going to be more of a presentation of the content that's within the joint plan, much like kind of a little bit more of an extended version of what everybody just received tonight, where we just kind of go through each component of it, the thought process behind it. And then there will be a discussion to some degree at the end of that first meeting, but that's more going to be question and comment based, or we'll take down information. And then at that follow-up meeting, we're going to take that information, find those answers, and actually represent it to the group. So a big portion of the first one is just going to be presenting what's in the plan. Second one is going to be that probably a more extended discussion of those elements and questions that we weren't able to immediately answer as part of the first meeting. But yeah, so we have our story map. We have the slides that we're going to be presenting, and we have the joint plan itself. And all of that material is going to be made available to you guys, I believe tomorrow, even potentially, if everything goes well, for you guys to review and look over. And then we're also available throughout the week if you have any questions that come up.
This is just like a silly, like party planning kind of question, but will we do introductions? And, because, knowing people and getting some sort of personal level helps engage dialogue, more respect, more courtesy, kind of thing. So will we have like kind of a little open session to start things off? And maybe, I don't know, was that planned?
I don't know if we've got to that level of detail, Hans, with our colleagues at Thurston County, but that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, that is a great suggestion. We are going to be meeting at Thurston County's facility, and they are going to be taking the lead on kind of the introductions, a lot of that beginning part of the meeting. I come in about halfway through and then end, and then they take over again. So there will be some discussions, but they're going to be kind of acting in the facilitator role at that site. So we can definitely talk about making sure that there's some formal introductions and everybody gets to know each other before we dive in.
Maybe coffee and cookies, I don't know, but
Yeah, anything we can do to make everybody feel comfortable.
Are you gonna physically be there?
I will be there physically, yes.
I just think it might work better.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
I wasn't sure, so.
Yeah. Yep. I will not be there. Nobody asked me when we should do these meetings. So I'm actually going to be on vacation for the next 2 meetings. So yeah.
what?
Oh, I just happen to be on vacation too. How about you guys?
I don't think the planning commission sent that to city council for vote or anything, so.
Yeah, if we've had some logistical challenges, one of which being some scheduling things. Unfortunately, they send it to you guys for the doodle poll without sending it to either Hans or myself, so, yeah, so
So it's 3 Wednesdays in a row.
just two.
Two.
Yeah, and then there'll be a public hearing that will be scheduled for the end of September. So that's a joint public hearing, again, back over at the county courthouse, or not county, not the courthouse, but the
Desperately
atrium.
be back for the second one, I hope.
It's a joint public hearing,
Correct.
and how does that work?
You all kind of sit at the same table and take the testimony.
And, okay, and they're kind of take the lead on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
They had the.
I just wanna.
Do you have to run the meeting?
Yeah.
Dave?
Because you could be on
Know if I need to
vacation.
bring the big gavel.
I'm not anticipating, I mean, you never know, but I'm not anticipating that it's gonna be a huge deal. There's some other information that we didn't present tonight, some rezone applications, some redesignations that are, in my mind, very logical requests that, because, some of the zoning in the urban growth area hasn't been adjusted in so long that it's, getting rid of a mineral extraction zone, an old mine, and converting it to another use. Is just one example, but
Is that in our area?
no, it's in the urban growth area.
Is it the one that's on this side of Carpenter?
No, these are all UGA. So it would be out Stillicum Road, I think, is where, just before the Nisqually Bluff. So those types of things.
There.
There'll be some additional requests that will be wrapped into the joint plan that you may receive some comments from, but I'm not anticipating anything.
So don't do what I do and the day before the meeting, grab your laptop, you better listen,
Look
open
at
it
it
up
and go, oh,
before.
God, yeah.
So for simplicity, it's going to be about like Martin Way Corridor and Lacey Urban Growth. Those are what we're trying to plan, coordinate about, correct?
Well, it's all the Lacey urban growth area, but yeah, there's a large portion of the Martin White corridor that goes through the Lacey urban growth area.
Okay, all right.
Which is very. Yeah. Don't lazy. No, lazy. Boy, if you had to buy signs for every time, welcome to Lacey.
I think there are signs out there that say that.
Okay.
One quick question. You may have answered this before. Is there a priority list as far as what the city is interested in acquiring within the UGA?
Not officially, no. We have some kind of informal ideas of what that list might entail. But a future work program item for the council is to actually develop a annexation strategy that would develop and formalize what that list would entail. So at this point, there is not, but yeah, it would.
That's been on there for 2 years.
Yeah. Yep, it's a priority
It's a
from the
future
councils that
work program.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we still have one more section.
Oh, and I'll be pretty quick on this. Hopefully.
We're gonna be doing the 2025 comprehensive plan
Plan
update
update
overview
overview.
by our very own Ryan Andrews.
Yeah. So I did include a staff report in your packet on this, and hopefully you got a chance to look at that. And I'm just gonna kind of go through this information relatively quickly, and feel free to ask any questions along the way. So essentially, I wanted to provide the Plan Commission a little bit of information on our large comprehensive plan update that's pending. We are due to update that by June 30th of 2025. So essentially, we're a little under 2 years away from that
Not much time.
deadline. So as part of that, we have a number of elements that will need to be addressed, some that have been adopted. So you might remember that you recently held a public hearing for the parks plan. That's going to council on Thursday night, as well as the rezone redesignation request for the Glenwood property as part of the 2023 suite of updates. You've also made a recommendation to the council, even though it hasn't yet been adopted, on the water system plan, which makes up our comp plan, part of our comp plan, as well as the stormwater plan. We've done a lot of stormwater work. I think everybody's aware. So those are part of kind of the utilities section of our comprehensive plan. Those have been adopted, but there are others that will need some significant updates. A lot of the update of the comprehensive plan, I think, as you're all aware of, really kind of revolves around an update to the land use element. And that's probably going to be the largest part of the effort, is updating our land use element. And we've talked about some of this stuff already tonight, some of the recommendations coming out of the Martin Way corridor, looking at our various sub areas. So we've got, you know, the Midtown, we've got a new sub area since the last comp plan was adopted. That's the Depot District. We also have our Northeast area sub area as well. One thing I'll mention on the land use element, kind of what we're seeing coming down the path, is that we've done a lot of housing related updates to our land use element, and we'll continue to do some. But we've hit the low hanging fruit on all of the housing related stuff in our land use element. We've done a lot of upzoning. We've done, you know, some of those things, and we'll even do some more here coming soon with some adjustments to our accessory dwelling unit regulations. So we're at this point, what we're probably going to focus on more of is actually our commercial. So as you're seeing the update through the neighborhood commercial part, which has been a really fantastic process, is that there's some adjustments along the way that's needed to our commercial zones, especially because a lot of them haven't been touched in you know, a long time. So, you know, really looking at the use and the dimensional standards, and even how many zones that we have. We have a number of commercial zones that I think it would be even difficult for me to explain some of the differences between some of them. And so really taking kind of a cohesive look at all of our commercial properties, engaging, you know, the landowners and, you know, through our economic development element, really focusing on some of the things that the city can do to encourage more, you know, commercial properties to develop the way we want. So housing, kind of the next on that list, we've done a significant amount of housing work since the last update. Our affordable housing strategy, which we talked about tonight, our housing action plan, and what probably will be adopted by that point. Hopefully it will be our homeless response plan, which is that big community-wide, you know, 30-person group that was conducted the last couple years through COVID that developed some recommendations for addressing homelessness in our community, which essentially has been implemented or is being implemented, but it's just never been adopted. So that will be a part of that. As Grant mentioned, we're also doing some updates to our housing allocation numbers, so that'll be included in there. We've brought to you some information on the manufactured home preservation that Jennifer, our housing coordinator, is working on. She's going to be back in October to give you some results of some surveying that she's been doing out in the manufactured home communities. So some of those things will be included in that as well.
Isn't that the topic where the military person joined?
Yes, yep, Gordon, our intern, Gordon, yep. So yeah, Gordon is no longer with us, but Jennifer has taken up that where Gordon left off.
That
So
was really interesting.
Yeah.
We did a lot of good research.
transportation is also a pretty heavy lift. Our last update to our transportation element was 2012. And so Hans mentioned our pedestrian bicycle plan that was done in 2018. So that the recommendations from that would need to be put in, as well as some of the stuff coming out of the Martin Way corridor study and others. So that's going to be a fairly large project. The environmental element. So this is things like urban forestry, climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, critical areas ordinances. That's where all that lives. A couple things that I wanted to highlight there were we will be completing an update to our urban forest canopy analysis. So if you remember, there was some questions the last time we did that as far as like what the percentage of tree cover that's in Lacey and keeping that updated. So we'll do that as part of this process. And then also there's a state requirement now that we actually put in a climate change and resiliency element within this now. So that'll be folded in. The good news is that we have a big head start on that through the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. So for us, it's really putting in the recommendations of that plan that apply to us, you know, taking from that and folding it into our own comp plan. And really climate change is I'll say that's a kind of a theme throughout that winds its way throughout all of our comprehensive plan, whether it's transportation, land use, you know, you name it, we'll be looking at it through a climate change lens.
Brian, is anyone analyzing the Montana decision with regard to that topic?
Is that the
fossil fuels.
They were
I don't know about that one.
just this week, a judge in Montana ruled in favor of plaintiffs adolescents who said the state state or maybe local wasn't following through on their climate promises.
Well, they weren't providing a livable atmosphere for their youth because of fossil fuel use. Yeah.
So I wonder, as we're crafting this language, is there a sensitivity to what?
I'll have to find out more about it. I tend to think Washington seems to be kind of on the leading edge of a lot of the climate change stuff where Montana maybe isn't. So
Okay.
I'll need to figure out if it's applicable to us or not. And get back to you and see where we go.
You have that student council, would be interesting.
Oh, that'd be
Council.
cool.
Their opinion on
Yeah,
that whole
That'd be really cool.
situation.
Oh, the youth council, yeah.
Yeah,
Just a couple other, so we've got a utilities element. So I mentioned the ones that have been adopted. We have an update coming up to our wastewater plan. So that's going to be an update to our sewer plan, as well as a brand new plan related to our reclaimed water utility. So that's the purple pipe water that comes, and it's irrigation and those kinds of things, comes from lot after the sewage is treated. It's put into that purple pipe, and so we'll actually have essentially a water plan for,
Irrigation.
yeah, for that, how to utilize that utility.
can you imagine the golf courses out in Hawkesbury? I mean, what a water city, I mean,
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, huge water savings if we're able to utilize that. And then private utilities as well. So that's things like Comcast and Puget Sound Energy, coordination with them on that. Economic development, so that's gonna be we did a robust update to that in 2016. So this is gonna be an update to that work, really, I think focusing a lot on the commercial engagement with our businesses and that kind of thing.
Hey, can I ask you about Puget Sound Energy?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're aware, they're gonna stop, well, the scuttle is, they're gonna stop their net metering program for solar,
Okay.
starting in maybe it was 20, I think it was 24. Do we have any, like, can we talk with, is there something we can do about that? Like, can we, like, let them know we don't think that's a great idea?
You can, as a customer, do whatever you'd like.
The city doesn't have contracts with them.
I don't know. Let me check with Lindsay, our climate sustainability coordinator, and she's engaged with them right now on different projects, but I'm sure she can engage with them and see.
It's just, being able to sell back to them.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so if you put solar on your house.
Yeah.
And you generate more energy
You
than
feed it back.
you use, you feed it back into them and they net meter it and then you get credit on your bill.
They're doing away with that?
Rumor,
Rumor
and
has
I
it.
think it's pretty
Pretty good rumor.
official.
There's a lot of people there's a lot of people that have.
If you're
invested in
grandfathered
that.
in,
Yeah,
it,
there's
if
a
you're
lot of
in,
solar.
like I'm in it.
Yeah.
But I'm grandfathered, but we want more people.
Yeah, why
Exactly.
would you take away an incentive?
Yeah, it's a big incentive
Because,
because you can.
I guess, I don't know.
Okay, it's an interesting topic, yeah.
Wow.
I just think in the bigger picture, it's just another one of those
I can think of
climate
solar.
things that
That ought to
we
happen.
should.
Voting against that because it's a
You
big
know?
zone.
Yeah. Yep. And then the last thing, which will be coming to you soon, is our draft capital facilities plan that we've been working on for some time. And that really the big thrust there is looking at our large buildings. So City Hall, the shop, animal services can be the focus there. So with that, I wanted to provide you with, and I provided you a draft schedule in the packet. So I'm gonna share screen real quick so we can all see
Want to
this.
see the oil field.
The oil field. Well, that's coming soon. So Dave, just stand by. So here's the schedule. That's right now what we're looking at. So we're actually looking at kicking this off coming up. I'm saying spring of 24. That's basically January 1st through the spring. Doing our public engagement starting right after the first of the year. And then kind of front ended with the land use and housing elements, as well as the environmental element and economic development. And then kind of on the backside, looking more at transportation, utilities, and then those kind of adjustments to our development codes as a result of that. Let's see, I also wanted to give you some idea and kind of next steps and what we're working on. So between now and the first of the year, so this is a large effort that we'll need to complete in phases. Formally kicking off that public engagement, as I said, in January. In preparation for that, we're actually going to be conducting some work sessions with the city council between now and the end of the year, engaging the council, number one, and talking to them and informing them and reminding them of all of the stuff that we've done since the 2016 comprehensive plan was adopted. But then number two, engaging them on what they consider to be the priorities for the next round of updates. What we'll do is we'll use that information to then go out to the public and say, hey, this is what the council, what we heard from the council. Are there other priorities? Is the council lockstep with what the community is thinking, or are there other things that we might be missing that, the council should be informed on? That we didn't hear from them. So we're gonna probably do maybe a series, maybe 2 work sessions with the council to get that feedback and hear from them on kind of what their priorities are moving into this next.
Is that planning doing those work sessions or just city staff doing those work sessions?
City staff. So we will be leading that conversation. I would imagine that it would be informative and it may be a good idea for the planning commission to be there.
Yeah.
We'll certainly let you know when those are, because it'll be, really, I think, a good listening session, because not only will we be hearing about what we've done, but what we might do in the future. So I think there's some good information sharing that would go on there. And the other thing I was going to mention is that we're also going to be working on establishing or working with Thurston Regional Planning Council on doing some data gathering. And that's first of all, let's look at the oil field. So Dave, this is not an oil field. This is the city of Indianapolis. And it's a 3-dimensional model that actually looks at the revenue generation of the properties in Indianapolis.
That's interesting.
And so we're actually gonna do a similar exercise where we take basically Lacey and do this with it, so that we're looking at where those kind of highest value properties are in our community, and get some idea of where those are. And I'm probably, thinking a few steps forward here, but it's mostly probably going to be our Woodland District and our core area where those values are the highest, that they're generating the most revenue, and that have the highest assessed value. But it'll be a good way to be able to look at the community. It will also help us if we're looking at areas in the urban growth area to annex, because what it's going to tell is what's the revenue generation potential associated with this property. Is it worth annexing, or is it not? And so, it will tell that story.
What's the spire there? What's making Indianapolis this money?
Downtown Indianapolis.
Okay, so it's a pretty concentrated map then.
Yeah, so if you're ever bored and if you want something to do, there's a Midwestern, I'll say kind of like a city think tank out of Minnesota. They're called Strong Towns. They do a lot of this work, and this is some of the work that has come out of the Strong Towns movement. They have a podcast and other things that.
Are we contracting with somebody to do this?
Thurston Regional Planning Council can do this for us. So I'm sure it's going to cost a lot less than whoever did this for Indianapolis. That's the good news. And they have all the information that it would take to be able to do this. So
Based on current revenue or
current revenue.
projected revenue if you changed what it looked like, kind of thing?
That's a good question, but I think we would at least start with current revenue. I think it becomes maybe
planning.
something that you could also use as far as take the zoning map and turn that into the kind of the same thing. You can do an assumed value for, let's say, a single family residence versus a mixed use building, and do something based on the zoning as well. So that's a really interesting.
Because urban growth, a lot of it wouldn't have any revenue generation at this
Right.
point, but could have the potential for revenue generation.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
It's a nice tool.
Interesting.
And then the other is looking at our kind of socioeconomic data. And this is a map that I brought up. This is from the State Department of Health, that they've done some, it's this environmental health disparities map. And so they've pulled census data, and there is a lot of data coming out of the 2020 census that we can utilize. that would help us make, and I'm just gonna bring up socioeconomic. I was looking at this earlier. I'm gonna pick on, there is a great census tract that is basically panorama. And you can tell, let's see,
Except for my house.
oh, that's not the layer that I was thinking. Let's try this one. Okay, so here, yep, this is the one I was trying to find earlier. So you can see here so it ranks everything from a 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. So for example, this census tract that is over Panorama, the population that's 65 plus is a 10. So if you look at
What is?
you can click on this and then you can bring up like different, so you can see here the age groups, and most of them are female.
You killed the men off a long time ago.
So
They're taking it over.
Thank you.
So you can see that there's a lot of information that can be gained from the census. This map was used at a state level for things like environmental health hazards. How far do you live from a freeway? How far do you live from a Superfund site? Those kinds of things, which we wouldn't be using it for our comprehensive plan. But it would be things like, how far do you live from a park? Or are there sidewalks in your neighborhood? And what we would be looking at, this is at a census tract level, we'd be actually getting down to the individual census block. So even a smaller geography,
Easy.
so that we
Isn't that
could,
fantastic?
so that we could use that information to aid in our decision-making, so that we can find areas maybe that are socioeconomically disadvantaged that we could prioritize for a project, for a new sidewalk or a, transportation connection, or, a zoning, something to change the zoning. So anyway, there's a lot of information that that's coming out of the 2020 census that we can utilize. We plan to sign a contract with TRPC to be able to pull that information together.
Is that just rolled up in census data that comes out, or does somebody manipulate that?
No, it's out of the census data that comes out, and then the other is the American Community Surveys, which is related. It's information that is queried by the census on a periodic. It's not associated with the 10-year census. It's basically sent to individuals. Not everybody gets it. It's a snapshot, right? And I think it's done every 3 years, not every 10 years. So there's a lot of good information coming out of that. I think Carrie has her hand.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just curious, the Fortress website that you just had up, is that something that anybody can access, or do you need a subscription or permission?
Totally public. If you like, I'll send the planning commission a link to that.
Cool.
That'd be great, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So with that's what we're working on until the beginning of the year, kicking off the comp plan with public engagement at the first of the year. And I think that's all I had at this point.
Okay, great. There is no old business. Any communications or announcements? Yeah, anything other than we have a lot of meetings ahead.
Yes.
Okay. Now, our next meeting is August 23rd. The Joint Planning Commission meeting with Thurston County. It is in the Atrium building. Is everybody familiar with that building? It's on Pacific Avenue. If you know where the Olympia Co-op is.
No? Is there another landmark?
3000 Pacific Avenue.
Okay.
It's got a big sign out front now that
Yeah,
says Thurston County.
Is it one of the Thurston County?
And they
permits
call
that?
it yes, it's called the Atrium because you'll see a big glass atrium in
In the
front.
middle.
6:30 PM,
And
right?
it said started at 6:30, so.
Correct.
It's the old Ernst building. If you've been around here, that's
Ernst, is that what you said, Grant?
Ernst.
Yeah, they used to have popcorn there.
Yeah, if you've been around a while, you know it was an Ernst once upon a
okay.
time.
Yeah, the green-
Not Yardbird?
Not Yardbird.
And then is there any way we could get sooner than later, know the time to be decided for the bus trip? Like is that a
Oh, okay.
midday thing or?
No, it'll be an evening, but it'll be 5:30, 6 PM, something like
Okay.
that. That's
Your
September
bus that goes
14th.
through McDonald's, okay?
We will, and what we do for those, has everybody, have you
I
not
did
done?
one.
I
Okay.
did one.
All right, so they'll do probably a light dinner here in the council chambers about 5, and then probably leave on the bus at 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Okay,
It does, yeah.
alrighty.
And we just
And with that,
cruise around and wave at people.
we're adjourned.
Do we have?
Thank you all.